Madam Undersecretary, thank you for the interview and welcome on the program. Secretary Pompeo in December said that the U.S. will withdraw from the INF Treaty unless Russia complies within 60 days. The deadline is approaching. It is set for the 2nd of February. What are the odds that the U.S. will eventually withdraw from the INF Treaty?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Jana, for making the time. This is an incredibly important topic and treaty, and with the German counterparts, the Russian audience, and the European partners. So such an important part. So thanks for the opportunity, first and foremost, to be able to talk about it. You may know that we did meet with our my Russian counterpart, the Deputy Foreign Minister, last week in Geneva to discuss this, and unfortunately made no new ground. We continued to raise the points and remind the viewers that this has gone over 2 administrations, over 5 years. So the Obama administration and now the Trump administration, and Russia still continues to violate the treaty. So we raised specific questions. They have heard many of them before, and unfortunately the Russian response, they continue to violate the treaty.
So you think that the decision will be on the U.S. part to withdraw from the treaty?
Well, we've been clear, like as you mentioned, the Secretary spoke clearly in December that that Russia was in a material breach and that we would invoke, and it had 60 days, as you mentioned, on February 2nd. And if Russia isn't in compliance by February 2nd, that our intent is to suspend our obligations under the treaty. We've mentioned that with partners and allies, we've got great support. I was just in NATO last week, briefed the NAC. Great support from the Secretary General and our NATO partners. But yeah, the treaty is very clear and our obligations are very clear, and unfortunately Russia continues to violate it. But February 2nd, if they're not in compliance, we'll suspend our obligations.
What's the difference? You don't mention withdrawal, you mention suspension. And I read the INF Treaty and it doesn't provide for suspension. What's the difference?
No, it does. But the suspension, again, we had said we will suspend it, and then a 6-month clock runs, if you will. During that time, Russia still can get back into compliance, but it frees our obligations under the treaty. So we suspend our obligations with the intent to withdraw if they don't get back in compliance. But we have abided by the treaty for the entire time, and by suspending our obligations, that we'll be able to do the research and development of similar systems that Russia now has fully fielded in the field.
So Russia, in this case, would have another 6 months to be in compliance?
They do.
What are these exactly missiles in question that Russia allegedly possesses that are not compliant with the treaty? Could you name this?
Right. So the SSC-8 is the NATO nomenclature that I'm subdefining. The Russians know which system it is. We've continued to meet with them and show them intelligence and information on why this system is not in compliance. We've continued to show them the test dates, locations of when they conducted the tests, that our intelligence community and our partners, we've shared that information as well, and they continue to deny that the test results were the same. We've shared this information. We worked very hard with our intelligence community to get the intelligence, what they call downgraded, so we can share it with our NATO partners and share it with other allies. And you've seen the results and response. All of our NATO partners and allies continue to call out Russia, said they've seen the information, they support our efforts to uphold the obligations of the treaty.
But Russia also claims that the U.S. is not compliant with the treaty, and the example they always mention is that the United States deploys an anti-missile system in Romania, and there is a special missile launcher that is not compliant. Are these claims true?
They're not true, and Russia is the only country that continues to raise these. Again, the other parties to the treaty, our NATO partner and allies, continue to say America, the United States, is in compliance with the INF Treaty. Russia continues to raise the Aegis ashore, and among other things, we continue to provide them facts and information why these systems are treaty compliant. Again, they're the only nation that calls us out. Our NATO partners and allies have been on board, and we've gone back and continued again, fact-based, evidence-based, intelligence-based, and provide this with the Russians on why that system is.
But could the Russians verify that these missile launchers are compliant with the treaty, or they are not allowed to get into this anti-missile system base?
Right. Well, as part of the treaty, you don't get to just randomly check other nations' systems. That's That isn't part and purview of the treaty, but we have provided them with the intelligence, again, and facts-based data, as have our partners, and they continued with their rhetoric. It's rhetoric and propaganda. It's laughable, quite honestly. They continue to grope and grasp for other reasons to try to kind of obfuscate and mask their violations. So the world sees it for what it is, and the violation of the treaty, and we continue to hold them accountable.
You always refer to verifiable results. So the INF Treaty provides for special verification commission. Does it still exist?
It does, yeah, and we've continued to abide by that. We've continued to meet our obligations with the treaty. We've called meetings and we've met. Our technical experts continue to meet as scheduled and as requested. Again, we've continued to abide by the treaty. It's not that the door is closed. The door has been open, but just Russia continues to violate. Continues not to field, as I tell folks, this isn't a research and a development system. This isn't in a lab. This isn't in a testing ground. These are fielded battalions. These are in the field today with soldiers manned and equipped to use these systems that can impact Europe and our partners.
So I would like just to mention that the INF Treaty is a bilateral agreement signed when the Soviet Union still existed. And now other countries which are not parties to this treaty, including, for example, China, these countries possess a lot of these missiles and missile launches that are prohibited by the treaty. Apart from other things, do you think that the U.S. possible withdrawal from the INF Treaty can be in American national interests because of the change in landscape and of appearing of big countries, powerful players in global arms race?
Yeah, you raise a great point. And the fact that the United States continues to abide by our obligations. As the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security and all of our arms control experts will tell you, the foundation of a successful arms control regime is abiding by the treaty that you signed, upholding your obligations as a responsible nation state. The United States continues to abide by our responsibilities. We continue to abide by the piece of paper that we signed, as do the other parties, other than Russia. It undermines all of our arms control areas. It undermines arms control regimes. So at the end of the day, it's about the defense for the American people and in partnership with our partners and allies. So if Russia isn't in compliance on February 2nd, we have abided by it. We haven't done the research and development. We will do that and commence
But I mean
that.
Another thing. So I am referring to Mr. Bolton's interview that he gave to Kommersant, it's a Russian national newspaper, and he mentioned and he quoted President Trump that for this treaty not to be outdated, two preconditions should be met. One is a compliance of Russia, and another is the decision of China to eliminate non-compliant missiles and missile launches, though China is not a part of the treaty.
Yeah, the INF Treaty and our discussions today with INF Treaty is with Russia. It is with the Russian government and their leadership, and they know what they need to do to get back into compliance. We've been very clear, our partners have been very clear. The failure of the INF Treaty at this juncture is all about Russia.
So you don't think that the situation has changed a lot in the world, and the U.S. withdrawal might be beneficial for the country to ensure its security because of growing arms race and growing threats coming from other countries like China, etc.?
Well, absolutely, the global environment has changed. The world, as when President Reagan signed the document, and the world today is in a very different place. As you've mentioned, China has fielded systems that, if they were party to the treaty, would violate the treaty, as have other nations started with their research and development. But the INF Treaty is about Russia. INF is about getting Russia back into compliance. But absolutely, the world today is very different from when this treaty was designed. Again, to underscore that, the importance of armed control regimes.
So China is not in question?
This is about Russia.
that's about Russia. So, as you might know, President Putin in his national address said that Russia had developed new types of arms, and he also mentioned that Russia actually had no other choice because the United States of America withdrew from their anti-ballistic missile treaty back in 2002. I'm sorry. Are Putin's concerns justified?
They're not. There's not a valid discussion. Again, it's rhetoric, it's propaganda, it's not facts-based. We continue to see that and hear that time and time again. We heard it and saw it yesterday with the mock-up demonstration of the system that most people didn't attend, and quite candidly, those that did attend weren't able to ask questions. It was a static, it was laughable. So as Russians say that it's a transparency measure, I think most professionals would tell you is quite laughable. A static display isn't going to prove that the missile's range. So again, it's rhetoric, it's propaganda. We use fact-based decision-making. That's why
you're saying that it's laughable. That means that these new arms that Putin presented in front of in his national address, not to the people but to the parliament. So these actually arms do not exist.
No, what I'd say is laughable is the static demonstration yesterday. The static display of the system doesn't prove what the system can and cannot do. Again, they continue, we've seen it with this treaty, what their obligations are versus what they're doing are in two different places. So we are concerned with the development of Russia's systems, and we're going to, again, protect the United States citizens and work in collaboration with partners and allies to make sure we protect ourselves. And if that means new systems and research and development, we'll cross that bridge. At the end of the day, it's about the national security interests of protecting Americans and working with our partners. And we've seen the importance of that as the violations with the INF Treaty.
But do you find these arms that were presented, would you regard them as a potential threat to the American security?
I can tell you today, with multiple fielded battalions of an INF violating missile system, that is a threat to our European partners and allies, and it's a threat to Americans. The Russians have the capability of a system that's in violation of a treaty, and we have an obligation to protect our interests.
So there are, apart from the INF Treaty, there are other treaties that ensure global security, and among one of them is the so-called New START Treaty, and it's gonna expire in 2021. Do you think that this treaty will be expanded or not?
What I can tell you is the New START Treaty, we are in compliance, as is Russia. They are meeting their obligations under New START. We met our central limits in February of last year, as did the Russians. They continue to do inspections under New START. We continue to do inspections under New START. I would say we have 2 more years, as you mentioned. 2021 is when it expires. We're not at the table today to discuss New START. We're at the table today to discuss INF. But right now, both countries are meeting their obligations under New START.
So there is another important issue. It refers to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Do you think that Russia actually breaks the treaties associated with this non-proliferation? Does Russia actually transfer these weapons of mass destruction to internationally sanctioned countries like Iran or like Syria?
I can tell you that preventing the proliferation of those technologies is incredibly important for our global security. I'll be meeting next week in Beijing, the P5, where I'll be meeting with my Chinese counterpart. I'll be meeting with the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov. I'll be meeting with, again, the P5 with the Brits and the French to continue to emphasize and talk about the importance of non-proliferation, how we work together as a P5. I hope and trust that Russia will come to the table with some tangibles that we can discuss, because it is of critical importance.
But for now, do you have any proof that Russia probably transferred or is still transferring some weapons, some types of weapons of mass destruction to sanctioned countries? And I'm most interested in Syria.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about intelligence information, obviously in the open network, but I can tell you to underscore the importance of preventing the proliferation of these technologies to rogue nations, to non-state actors, and that's why we're important discussions coming up next week in the P5.
One controversial thing about Syria is that back in 2014, then President Barack Obama claimed that all most dangerous weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, had been destroyed. Nevertheless, there were attacks after 2014. How could you explain this?
Well,
where did they get these chemical weapons from?
Well, again, it talks about support to rogue actors and rogue nations. The Assad regime falls clearly in that area, and I would say there's some great grounds being made, probably note with the OPCW, the attribution mechanism on the use, clearly striking back both in Syria and with the Novichok, the Russian use of Novichok agents in the UK. So again, responsible actors and nation states have spoken. We cannot tolerate this behavior. We will not tolerate these actions. There needs to be repercussions with this, and there needs to be an attribution mechanism. And we're working together with partners and allies and made great grounds over the last year and a half in that area.
But I'm interested whether the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons was wrong with the analysis that they gave back in 2014. Or something else happened. What do you think? What's your assessment?
You know, I've done 28 years in uniform as an intelligence officer, and fulfilling an intelligence picture, it's like putting a puzzle together. Sometimes you have some of the pieces, but not all, and it takes time to get those pieces. And through the great work with partners and allies, sharing information, working with different agencies, and we put that information together, and now have been able to do the attribution mechanism, whether it's the Russians in Salisbury or the actions in Syria. So we continue to work hand in glove with our partners, and together we'll continue to.
So you're not ready to reveal all the results of this investigation into these chemical attacks?
Yeah, I think the OPCW has been very clear on the attribution mechanism, and I would anticipate we'll continue to develop that picture, and they've been clear to call out Russia on the violations that they've had.
Taking a look at the global security situation right now, Russia is on top of the agenda as a disruptive country. But do you think that only Russia is a disruptive country in the context of global security?
You know, the global environment's incredibly challenging. There's, again, actions from state actors, non-state actors, but we continue to have a dialogue with Russia. The president has said it, the secretary has said it. We're calling them out where they're in violation, but there are the other areas that we're working together. And so the dialogue needs to occur, but we call people out when they violate their responsibilities, and with the INF Treaty, clear violation from Russia.
But I mean, so you see right now that probably U.S. will withdraw from the INF Treaty. It withdrew from this anti-ballistic missile treaty back in 2002. We are not sure about New START. Do you think that the picture has changed, and this architecture that used to be very efficient, I don't know, a decade or 2 decades ago, is now not viable anymore?
I would say you have to assess the threat environment as you stand today and assess where these are. We've fulfilled our obligations under these treaties. We will continue to assess if they are still relevant, but until then we abide by our obligations. We've done so with the INF. We'll continue to do so. But again, the world is in a different place, and when these various treaties were signed, we'll fulfill our obligations as long as we're in that treaty.
Do you expect a renewed arms race with Russia, or probably with other countries, taking into account that Russia is developing new arms systems? It's gonna be a new arms race or not?
Well, as I tell folks, they talk about the challenges. Is there going to be an arms race? And I remind them that Russia has fielded battalions of these systems. So right now there's a race. The Russians are clearly violating and started the so-called race. We'll continue to abide by the treaty. We'll conduct research and development when and if we're allowed to do so. After the second, we'll always develop systems that help protect our global interests for the United States, and working with our partners and allies, and this is a great example of that.
If you look at the situation right now that has substantially changed, and the situation that was in the times of Cold War, what are the differences and similarities between these two situations?
Well, I could probably do a couple more news shows with you to describe the threat environment. I mean, obviously, technology has changed, partnerships have changed, the threat environment from radical Islamic threat to state actors have changed, but fortunately, we've got a great team here. We continue to assess that. We continue to work with our partners, DoD across the interagency and partners and allies, whether it be in the Middle East, Europe, or globally around the world, to best protect those interests.
Do you think that the situation, the security situation right now is better, that the environment is more secure than it was back in the times of the Cold War?
I don't think you really can compare or contrast. The world's in two very different places than we were in the 1980s and where we are today. Again, I've served a nation for over 30 years in various war zones and conflict areas. And again, there are threats there, and we will continue to mitigate those threats, both with our systems, our people, and work with our partners and allies to best protect the interests.
Secretary Thompson, thank you very much for the interview, and best of luck for you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you.